Hi, I'm Mike Parks of Momentum Results. Welcome to this short video around influencing styles. What I'm going to do is talk you through 4 key influencing styles, and as I go through it, try and think about where you sit with each one. Now, the reality is none of us have just purely one influencing style. We tend to rely on a combination, but from my experiences, we tend to have a dominant and a backup style that we tend to resort to. Now, this work is based on the Merrick and Reed work back in the 1950s around social styles, but has really stood the test of time. So it's very practical, very useful and very easy to use. So what I'm going to do is talk you through the framework, talk about some combinations as a way of stimulating your thoughts around your own style. Now, like many frameworks, there's an axis, a 4-box model, and I'm going to describe that 4 boxes to you. Along the horizontal axis, at the far end, we have the whole axis is level of forcefulness. At the bottom end, we have low forcefulness, and at the top end, we have high forcefulness. So at the far end, we have what might be described as quite aggressive at the most extreme, but it's increasing levels of forcefulness as you go up the axis. At this end, more milder and even passive at the far end. So you've got far extremes of aggression and passive, but there's a long way between that axis, between one and the other. The vertical axis is very much about responsiveness. So what we mean by that is at the very bottom, individuals are very controlled, very hard to read, very measured at times. They don't tend to give too much away at the very extreme. At the top, they're very animated, very lively, very engaging, give away lots of indicators in terms of their body language, their expressions, their tone, as a contrast. And obviously there's a long way between the two. So you've got the axis of low forcefulness at one end, high forcefulness at the other, high responsiveness and low responsiveness. And then I'm going to describe the 4 styles. Now the reality is, as I said before, individuals aren't one, but they tend to have a dominant and a backup. And they also give you a lot of indicators about which ones those are. So let me talk you through the 4 styles. Okay, let's start in the top far corner. Somebody's high responsive, so very animated, very lively, but also can be quite forceful. And there's varying degrees of that. These we call expressives. They tend to be very outgoing, very animated, very lively, very engaging, very imaginative, very spontaneous, but equally can get very bored quickly. Be on to the next thing. You can be talking about something, they've got so many things on the go that they move on to something slightly different. They can get distracted, bored, disinterested, start on some things and then move on to something else. So follow through, unless they're really interested in it, is unlikely to happen. They'll be on to the next thing. So imaginative, lively, spontaneous. In this bottom corner, someone who's quite low responsive, but highly forceful. And we call those drivers. Drivers are very clear, direct, firm. They can also be quite forthright, blunt, say it as it is. There's no niceties around it, very straight to the point. Can be cut through, can be very tenacious, very determined, but also can really cut through things, can be very direct, blunt, as I say. So you've got expressives, lively and animated. You've got drivers, very focused, very direct, very to the point, very blunt, very unforgiving at times. Now, the interesting thing with all of these styles, every one of them can achieve results, but they just do it in different ways. So people often think there's an ideal. There's no ideal to this. It's about different ways of achieving things. Okay, if we come along to the top, we have high responsiveness and low forcefulness, amiables. Amiables tend to be very warm, very friendly, build good quality relationships, get on well with others. Equally very good at picking up on the nuances of conversations, the nuances of what's being said. They also can tell when people aren't quite being as sincere. They can read between the lines. They build very trusting relationships. Now, some people would tend to think amiables, they're a walkover because they're quite accommodating. They don't like conflict. They won't rock the boat. but they're not a walkover. Even though they're accommodating, won't rock the boat, they might not agree with you, but they might not always tell you. They might not go along with you, they just won't tell you that. So it's a misnomer that people think that amiable's a walkover. They're not at all. They're very nice, very warm, very friendly, very sincere, build good quality relationships, long-lasting relationships. They tend to know what's happening and are very tuned into it. And the final style we're going to talk about, low forcefulness, low responsiveness, analytics. Analytics, by the very word, analytical, measured, dispassionate, objective, like to weigh things up, take their time, will only come to the conclusions, will come to their own conclusions by being very thoughtful, very measured. They won't be rushed. They'll tend to leave not a lot away when they're thinking and working. There'll be at times no expressions. They'll be thoughtful. So you often won't know what their reactions are. But what they are doing is often drawing things in. They're actually taking the data in to reach their own conclusions. So what I've done so far is described the 4 individual styles. What I want to do now is just talk about, in principle, how you influence each of those 4 styles. Starting with expressive. So if the individual that you're trying to influence is of an expressive style, it's not about going in there with 150 PowerPoints. It's not going there with a wealth of data. It's actually going in there with actually ideas, thoughts, to try and get them hooked, get them excited, get them into discussion and debate. The reality is, if you take in your big PowerPoint presentation, if you take in your wealth of data, their first question is to be, what's the top line? Give me an overview. Give me the key messages. They'll want to talk about the high level, broad principles around it. They'll want to discuss it, debate it. Also recognise that when you come out of the room, the likelihood is things might have changed. If you've got them excited and animated, their mind will have started racing on to different ideas. Be also mindful that when you go back and see them again, they've probably moved on again. So it's about keeping in touch with them. It's about managing that process. So that's expressives. So with drivers, it's about being very clear, very succinct. 3 key messages, I say 3, but very clear, succinct messages, to the point, what you're trying to get and what the benefits are, to hook their interest. So it's about being short, sharp and crisp. Thereafter, you might well find you get into dialogue and discussion and debate, and they will be quite robust. They tend to be quite robust. As we come round, we come to amiables. Now, amiables, the core of influence amiable is about long-standing relationship. It's about how well you work together. It's about involving them. It's about getting their opinion, getting their ideas. Unfortunately, if you've had nothing to do with them and you just bowl in there, then the likelihood is there's going to be a bit of scepticism. Having said that, they are very naturally warm and engaging, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're won over. It is about their involvement, their commitment, their ideas and their thoughts. As we come down to analytics, the very word itself, analytical, it's about being measured, very dispassionate, very objective. Analytics like to come to their own conclusions. They like to weigh things up themselves. It is about presenting them with the data. It is about presenting them with that information. It is about giving them time to work it through and reach their own conclusions. So analytics like to come to their own thoughts, but they'll do it in their own time. So that gives you a sort of broad feel of the 4 styles. Now what I want to talk about is some of the combinations. So, combination, expressive and driver. Now this type of thing, if the dominant style is expressive and the backup is driver, then it's very much about lively, animated, engaging, getting quite excited about things. But when the chips are down, the driver will kick in to be very direct, very focused. So we can have this fluctuating between the 2. So, and you can always tell when you start talking to people about which is the dominant style and the backup because of the way they respond to you. So expressive driver, you see the expressive, the liveliness, the animated, and then when there's a bit of challenge, you might see the driver bit coming. Let's try another driver analytic. It's very much below the line, very much task focused. It will be very unemotional, very clear, very direct, very unresponsive in terms of animation, but it'll be about being clear, crisp. There'll be none of the niceties around it. People might find them quite intimidating because they don't necessarily do lots of the nice warm things that you might expect, the natural relationship things. They're very focused. So driver analytic is being focused, determined, the driver, and the analytic is weighing things up for themselves and working it through. Amiable analytic, okay, on the less forceful side, but what you have therefore is a more reflective style. It can be, if it's amiable first with a backup of analytic, a lot warmer and friendly, but it will be a more reflective. It will be a more reflective, more passive style necessarily, depending on how much amiable there is. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, they're easily won over, as I've said. Certainly with analytic as a backup, they'll need to come to their own conclusions. And if they're not being handled well, the amiables will pick up on that. If they feel there's lack of sincerity, authenticity, they will pick that up. As I've said before, they might not tell you in the moment, but they will pick that up. So you might not have influenced them and won them over. If you take amiable expressive or expressive amiable, very much above the line, a lot of focus about people, enthusiasm, relationships, can be very lively, animated, very enjoy having the social, robust conversations, the fun, the engagement. But equally, there's something there about follow through and ensuring that there's that focus on making things happen. Clearly, amiables will make things happen because they won't want to let people down. But expressives will be on to their next exciting moment. So depending where the dominant and the backup is, will determine where you need to follow through. There are lots of different combinations, and I'm not trying to do all of them in this session. What I will do is talk about driver amiable, which people often think, well, that's a contradiction. Somebody very focused, very determined, and somebody who's very much about relationships, building good quality relationships, getting people to know well. And people often think, well, that's a perfect match. They're coming together, therefore they blend. Unfortunately, the two things don't happen at once. In reality, what you find is they're in different modes. So, for example, I can remember a director that I knew very well. He used to visit stores, was predominantly driver. He used to enter stores and see things and get agitated straight away. The driver would kick in, be very focused about what's happening here, why is that happening, what's gone on here. Very directive. The amiable side didn't kick in. Then he'd leave in his car, driving away a tight bit of time to stop and reflect, and the amiable would kick in. And he'd probably think, actually, I didn't handle that very well. I wonder how they're feeling about that now. I don't think I've actually got them on board as well as I could have done. And he'll then phone them up and have the conversation a bit after the event. So the reality is, these styles don't happen, can happen in the moment, but very rarely compensate for each other. People are in different modes and they switch between them. And your challenge is to spot which mode they're in order to be able to influence them effectively. So going back to what I said at the start, it isn't about changing who you are. This is understanding what your preferred style is. If you can understand others and therefore how they like to be influenced, putting aside the knowledge you have, the data that you will use, the style you use has a fundamental impact on success. So you do need to think, what do they like and how do I adapt? And every individual leaks information to you. They leak their style, but they do it in different ways. So hopefully that's given you a good feel for the four styles, a little bit of talk around the combinations, but also recognising that we are not one of them. We tend to have a dominant and backup. Some people have said, well, I might do all four. Maybe. From my experiences, people tend to have a dominant and backup. They certainly have ones that they find very hard to do genuinely and sincerely. Thanks very much for listening.